Hello and welcome to All the Best Pictures, the podcast where we watch all the Best Picture winners from the start for some reason.
Because we hate life and everything in it.
What are we doing? What are we doing?
So this will get really, really pretty good, Sam, in about 60 episodes, and then pretty bad in about 75 episodes, but then okay again.
Exactly. And based on our schedule of 1 a month, 12 a year, we're in 1929 now, and we're going to be in the mid-40s in a year. Like, that's not too bad, is it? Is that bad? It's something.
It's something. We don't have to watch the 4-hour Godfather for, I think that won the Best Picture, for a couple of years. So that's something.
Right, so welcome to this podcast. It's a podcast where we talk about a movie we're not particularly interested in watching for an audience that's probably not interested in listening to us talk about it.
Just like our regular podcast.
Exactly. And, it's podcast gold. We're going straight to the top. Straight to the top of the charts.
Podcasting, that's right. Yeah. Straight to the top of podcasting, which isn't run or sponsored or starring TV stars. So,
as in nobody else.
It's quite a small number.
Yeah. Well, welcome, Dave. I didn't introduce you, but you're my co-host. You're my co-guest, co-presenter, as we host the 1929 Oscars, and today we're presenting the Best Picture winner too.
Exactly.
The Broadway Melody.
Yeah, exactly. From 1929. Climb into your time machine with us, and we'll go back to Prohibition America. I'm fairly sure women couldn't vote in 1929. I could be wrong on that one. Fact checker. The Wall Street crash is just around the corner, I think.
Seconds away.
It's not a good time for America. And this is the Best Picture of this year. It's the first movie with sound ever to win Best Picture, which isn't really a massive massive achievement, given it's the second Best Picture.
Second Oscars. Yeah. So the first one we did, previous episode, go back and listen to that, 1927-28 Oscars, which was Wings, which was a popcorn romp, basically, wasn't it, from the that won the first Best Picture, and also a silent movie, interestingly. So we watched a silent movie for 2.5 hours for you, listener, for you. And now we
enjoyed it. We enjoyed it.
We did. We watched a talkie, and you know what? As much as we were literally seconds away from canning this entire format, not at the first hurdle, but at the second hurdle, because we were like, oh, God, we have to watch a fucking musical from the 1920s. Are we really doing this with our free time? The answer is yes. So I hope you appreciate the sacrifices we have made, listener, for you.
Yeah.
For you.
And
so join us as we talk.
It wasn't terrible.
No, we talk about this actually. Pretty fun, pretty engaging, interesting movie that gives us a glimpse into the past, which is why we want to do this, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to sort of set the scene for this movie, really. It's worth remembering that even in 1929, we'd been making movies for 20 years. The film industry had existed for 20 years.
Yes.
We've been developing the tropes and the nuances and everything, obviously for silent movies mostly. So it's not exactly like a new medium, but the talkies, which is one of my favourite words because it's so of this Prohibition era. It's the talkies. They can talk in movies now, and it's like, but that is a big departure from especially coming from the silent movie we watched last month to watching this. There is a big difference, and there isn't, if that makes sense. It's still staged and what's the word, choreographed like a silent movie, but they had to write dialogue for this, and we talked about this, that we thought they probably had to write dialogue for the silent movies as well.
Yeah, well, they would have written it because the actors need something to work from, don't they? And also, we have the title cards, and there is a plot, there is a story. So, it's a good question. I'd be interested to explore what scripts look like in the silent era, and if we had the same, enter left, exterior, and then Johnny says blah 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 blah, and so I think that's a good question. Let's Google that afterwards.
I suspect that a lot of that is like a one-to-one, and you can kind of see it from this and Wings last week. I think a lot of it is like a one-to-one from stage. Like, I know this is obviously Broadway Melody. That it's a film. Allegedly, it's a musical. But I would say it's actually not much like a musical that we would know as a modern audience for a musical.
It's interesting.
Because it's more it's a film about filming a music. It's about producing a stage musical. And there's a distinction there, isn't there? That the songs in this are mostly singing songs from the play that they're in, rather than songs about the goings on in their lives, even if there is some relevance there.
Yeah. Although there are a few, aren't there, that are non-diegetic, as in diegetic music is music that comes from that's in universe. Non-diegetic music is like, why the fuck are you singing? What are we doing? Like, you can't just stand on the tables in this restaurant and just sing on the tables. Sit the fuck down, Frank.
The easiest example to explain that, Sam, is diegetic is two characters sat having a coffee and there's music playing on the radio.
Yes.
And the other one is two characters sat having a coffee and music is playing to you, the audience, but the characters can't hear it.
Exactly. Like a score or whatever else, yeah. So when, yes, as we've explored, we weren't that enthused about watching this, but you know what? I really did enjoy it. And I think I enjoyed it because, number one, it is a bit meta. We get to like explore the process of bringing a Broadway show on, to Broadway, and how that works, and like the two women that we've got in this, Anita Page and Bessie Love,
Queenie and Hank.
Yes, Queenie and Hank, respectively.
Because no one in the 1920s had a real name. Everyone went by these weird nicknames. I'm not sure.
Hey, Queenie! Like
we society delineated and said. And it must be the internet. Like, we've got the internet now, so we don't need to give our friends stupid nicknames. We can all just go by our given names.
Because they've all got gamer tags. Yeah, exactly. It's no. So the film's about these two sisters trying to break into Broadway, isn't it? Basically, and I think like that as a concept is interesting. It's fun. It's engaging. These are two really, really engaging actresses who are just, I think, they own all the scenes they're in, and they really make it fun and engaging. And I think that's a good addition to this film. But also because it is, like the thing that really struck me compared to watching Wings, which because it was set in World War One as well, it felt very much in the past. It felt like we were watching a different universe. But the thing that struck me straight away with this movie is like, holy fucking shit. Movies are incredible. They are incredible. Like, we're watching, I know this is silly, right? But we're watching from almost 100 years ago somebody expressing themselves, so like with their voice, with their actions. It's all tied together. And I just think like the magic, how magic it must have felt. Number one, to see a movie for the first time, but number two, to around the late 20s, to see talkies and to be able to hear the voices and to see every single expression. Like, this is movie magic. And I just think there's something like that we just take for granted, that we can see people from the past. Like, that's amazing. In this film, that's the thing that straight away I was like, wow, these people have been dead for decades and yet we still get to know them.
Anita What's-Her-Face has only been dead for about 15 years, actually.
Okay,
which is also insane.
Oh, we've got lots to talk about her later on, haven't we? We'll come to Anita Page in a minute. What was your first impression?
So actually, just on that point, I think it is noteworthy that obviously, like, these people, obviously, especially some of the older people in this, were probably dead 5 years after it was made, which was nearly 100 years ago. Which is just an insane, mind-boggling thing to think about. And they'd been making films for 20 years then. It just maybe puts, like, kind of the idea I wanted to do these Oscar movies is nobody's watching this. Nobody's watching the Broadway Melody from 1929. Literally, it's us. It's just us and people at university studying film for a PhD. That's it.
And-
Those are the only two groups of people watching this.
I know. So thank you for listening, you university students. We very much appreciate it.
Exactly. You can crib all of this for your thesis.
Can I?
Right.
Can
No, I'm not
can
finished.
I,
I'm not finished.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
And what I think these films actually capture, as well as just the fact that the personalities and the people on screen, what you actually capture with a film like this, and we're going to be sandwiched here, where we did a film about World War One last month, and we're going to do a film about World War One next month. Whereas this is a contemporary movie that's taking place more or less at the time it's made. And I think you capture something in quite a casual way there, in much the same way that we sometimes talk about like 70s and 80s movies having a real feel of when they're made. You know, when they're not a period piece, when it's just a film happening at the time it's made. I think you capture this kind of like this distorted mirror image of like a certain aspects of society that is just on screen forever and preserved, and not necessarily in a way that the filmmakers intended, but like the first thing that struck me when we meet these the two sisters was how Some Like It Hot kind of steals quite a lot of the shots from this movie. I don't know if it's just the way they're dressed, the bonnets, but Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis in Some Like It Hot are dressed in a very similar way to the sisters when we first meet them.
Yeah.
And that struck me as like an in-film sort of thing.
Well, typical flappers, isn't it? Because
yeah.
Some Like It Hot, which came out in 1959, is set.
It's set in this time period.
It's like seconds again before
Yeah.
the Wall Street crash and the bloody Valentine's Day massacre and all that stuff. So like,
But it's interesting, isn't it? Is that reflective of Some Like It Hot is reflective of films like this, I think, as opposed to the time period. And that's kind of like and we've been doing that over and over and over again for 100 years since this movie came out.
We talked about it. We talked about it on the Some Like It Hot previous episode, like, comment, subscribe, because we were like, wow, this was made 30 years or so after. And you think this is like a movie from the 70s, you know, if it was still 2002 when
Which
when
it is,
we're
right?
alive. Yeah.
The 90s were 10 years ago, right?
Shut up. if it was, you know, that looking back to 30 years ago doesn't feel that much, and that film manages to capture it. The other thing with this as well is because it is so, like, it feels almost comical how close a representation of the stereotypical flapper scene that we get, and all of the Broadway stuff and all of the dancing and just the whole feel of it is very, very some of the languages, some of the language that she uses is really like, what the fuck are they talking about? Do you know what I mean? And I just think there's so much that you get, so much joy that you get from just experiencing what they were trying to portray in 1929 or whenever, you know, when this came out. Like, we get such a snapshot of the world as it was. Do you know what I mean? And yes, it's a distorted Hollywood view, but it's still fascinating. I loved seeing the relationship between the sisters. I love seeing all of the like little other characters that we come across, because they tell us something about the time. And I just think what again, back to my point there, what a treat in a historical sense that we get to literally watch and listen to how people were representing themselves, as opposed to trying to interpret it from, like, you know, clay tablets or whatever. That's a new thing. That's less than 100 years old.
Yeah.
Like, we've only just in the dawn of human history managed to do that. I think that's awesome.
It's really cool. It is a bit of a shame from my front, and I think I'm going to get some pushback here, that it's not a terribly amazing movie. I'm not saying it's a bad movie. It's just a average movie in terms of, like, and I've watched other 30s movies. I haven't watched loads of 20s movies, but I've watched quite a few 30s and 40s movies, and this just isn't like a particularly amazing movie. It's innovative for its time. It's interesting enough. I was interested. I think the performances are good. But I would say that all of that kind of pales to, like, how interesting the story of this movie is. So, like, the fact that it's an early talkie and that line you can draw to silent movies, I think is actually more interesting than the the film itself, and I think that's maybe why it suffers from a modern audience.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it wasn't successful at the time, obviously.
No, it did very well, didn't it? It was a kind of popular movie, and so yeah, I think this is a fun. Let's talk about the movie. Let's talk. So as we've said, the kind of basic concept is these sisters are coming into New York and they're trying to make it big on
their really bad act.
Terrible. Now, this is the thing, isn't it? This is the thing that I think because it's set in the past, because it's a movie from the past. Sorry, I think
because it's set in the past.
It's set in the past. I know what I'm trying to say. Because it's from the past. You just
it's not Rhiannon smelling her own pussy, is it? Really?
Like, well, there is that,
not the same thing, but it is the same thing. Maybe it's hard to know.
It's you know what it is. It's self-aware, and I think there's a thing that we think of. Oh, it's in the past. They didn't invent humor until 1981. Like this is a funny movie because these sisters are shit. They are not a good act, and they gain some moderate success by going out with, Jack's Warrener, which is a funny joke, which is a reference to Jack Warner.
Do you want to get sued?
Who was the rival of MGM, obviously Warner Brothers, and so they call him Jack's Warrener, which just comes across as Jack Warner every single time any of the cast say it, which is hilarious.
I mean, to be fair, it is quite a fart sniffy movie, which I'll justify there. A bit like Sunset Boulevard, which we watched. This kind of is a movie where they know it's a movie about it's not about Hollywood, but it's a movie Hollywood have made to kind of make fun of Broadway and kind of make fun of like stage stuff.
Completely, it's
the sisters are really bad, and that's making fun of like parochial, provincial like acts.
These rubes coming to the big
and they are rubes, and they're like, and they think they're really amazing because they've been playing these really little towns in small town America to farmers, and the show is they sing and they sort of like dance, but they're really close together, and it's not very good. It's like school play level, not very good.
Yeah.
And they come to the big city, and they're making this Broadway play, and all the people making the play are the worst character, like not bad characters or bad actors. They're just the worst people. They're dismissive and they don't know anything. You've got somehow in 1929 the really well developed trope of the gay stage assistant somehow was fully formed in the 1920s, which I am flabbergasted by because the longevity of that joke is astounding.
It's really disappointing, isn't it? It's like, because you think, and I don't just mean because it's the homophobia, obviously that as well, but also just because we didn't move on in 80 years.
Probably cribbing from Shakespeare. Gay stage Shakespeare.
Fucking joke. But like, come on, guys. There is more humour in the world, isn't there? But you're right that everyone's a dickhead.
It's making fun of it, isn't it? Like, it's not a very good production. It's not a very good play. It's not very engaging. Everyone in it's quite bad. I think intentionally, no one's particularly good.
And it's run by Jack Warner, and so like there's so much of that, which is like this guy's he acts like a big man. He's got like 4 assistants who he tells, who basically yes sir every time he says anything. So there's all of this, but also, as you say, there's the terrible, overly dramatic, we could maybe say, costume designer. There's the director who's pretty sharp but kind of useless as well. He's not really offering anything much in terms of actual. There's also the rest of the cast, which the other women who aren't very nice to the.
Well, they went as far, Sam. In 19, there were 3 named female characters in this movie, which is better than a lot of movies.
Passes the Bechdel test. It passes the Bechdel test.
But no, it is interesting, and it's interesting that like we always say, some things change and some things stay the same. It's interesting what had stayed the same. Obviously, like some of the tropes in this movie. What did we decide to call it? The sexy ingenue was our new updated, less litigious phrase.
Just call it the sexy baby, because that's
sexy
what it
baby.
is. Let's talk about Anita Page, the sexy baby. Now, I'm going to just hand that over to you, Dave, to explain those words and why you
said it
coined
4 or 5 times now, Sam.
You
the
personally
FBI
coined
coming
them.
to your door somehow in the UK.
What is a sexy
They have
baby,
jurisdiction.
then?
The sexy baby is, I think it's a term we've come up with, or we've stolen from someone else, and we can't possibly credit them because we've forgotten. I've looked on the internet for this. That's
You
right.
Googled.
I'm on all kinds of lists now.
Oh my God.
The term is, and we started using this term, I think, when we watched that Sandra Bullock, Sylvester Stallone movie. I want to say Time Cop. It's not Time. Demolition Man.
Demolition Man. Yes.
We're watching Demolition Man, and sexy baby is kind of like so there's loads of tropes for female characters within media because basically men are pigs, and a scantily clad woman who is quite stupid.
It's an
infantilized. Really sexy.
It's an infantilized sexual woman. Like
it's a really
sexy,
common
but infantilized
trope.
Yeah.
Sexy baby.
No.
Sandra Bullock in Demolition Man's like probably our peak go-to example of she's so stupid. She's like asking Sylvester Stallone, and what is kissing? while wearing a mini skirt and a low cut top. And that's the peak, but it's in everything, and it just does not go away. And Anita Page in this, Queenie's the character. It's absolutely, she's so naive, and she doesn't understand men being interested in her. And I'm like, they have men where you've been, surely. Anyway, she doesn't understand why all those men are interested in her. She's just really happy to be there. It's just this sort of like, it's the opposite of a femme fatale, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like it's the opposite of a femme fatale.
She's really naive, like you say, but also she's so earnest. And so I think there are points where she's like, I mean, there's, quite a lot of points where she's saying explicitly no. And
yeah, but like 1920s no, Sam, come on.
Yeah. because it's the fucking...
She's just ignored and there are no consequences for any of the people involved.
Like it was from 1920s until
I was going to say, so really it's like 1920s to 2022s.
Yeah, I mean, we'll give ourselves maybe like 7 months of this year to. Has it got any better? Not
7
really.
months
No.
The lockdown. Some of the lockdown was all right because everyone was in their own homes.
Yeah. So women are getting treated like shit, but Anita Page's character is kind of like, she's the young one, she's the naive, she's the younger sister, and she's also probably the quote unquote talent, as in she's prettier than Hank.
She's about 3 foot taller,
which we'll come to in a second, and that's why she kind of gets a rate, doesn't she, with some of the characters, and Jack Warren
literally why
is like, oh, she's good, I like her because I want to try and go out with her, and so that's like the motivation. Now, interestingly, I'm reading a book at the moment about Howard Hughes, and
you're reading a Hello magazine article about Howard Hughes.
It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating, listeners, because I think, as much as I'm like, why am I reading a book about a fucking millionaire? Like, this is just ridiculous. But also, fascinating aviation history, fascinating, like, he was a producer. But 94% of the book is just, and then Howard Hughes went out with Katharine Hepburn, and then Howard Hughes went with Ava Gardner, and it's like, it's just details of his sex life, right?
Howard Hughes Bangs, the autobiography.
If only they just called it that. And but thing is though, what we see in this movie, which is a Broadway rather than Hollywood executive or Grant, just going after young talent because they can bed them. It's literally what Howard Hughes did because he was a fucking creep, over and over and over and over again. So it's completely, written from the pages of history, and this movie nails it. Now, we set Anita Page against Bessie Love. But before we move on from Anita Page, should we talk about her career? Because she ended up pretty much after this movie giving up. I think it was 1936. She retired. And then she does nothing for 35 years until she comes back in 1996 to appear in... Let's have a look. Let's just move down. Sunset After Dark, playing Anita Bronson, which the movie doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. It's in red.
Are
The
these
link's
the,
in-
like are these like the supernatural movies?
No,
The,
no. That doesn't. That comes later. Then in 1998, Creature Realm from the Dead playing herself doesn't have a Wikipedia page. Then we get a little bit more at market. It does have a Wikipedia page. In 2000, she played Sister Separina in a direct-to-DVD release of Witchcraft. This is amazing. Witchcraft 11 Sisters in Blood, which is part of the Witchcraft series.
she wasn't in the first 10.
She wasn't.
We have a rule, don't we? Like, if
16
there are more
movies.
than 10 movies in your series, they're all shit. Probably.
16 as of March 2018. And these are just a fucking treat. So she does, I don't know how, I don't know what she's thinking. I don't understand. She dies in 19...
It feels like a total lack of social security in America forced her back to work in the 90s and
It's
100s.
awful. She died in 2008, aged 98, and she was a massive silent movie star from 1925 up until 36. 10 years of just owning Hollywood almost, and it's
sometimes
maybe a
hard
tragic.
to just on that note. It's sometimes hard to comprehend as we talk about people being massive silent movie stars, and then you're like from 1925, and we're like carry the noodle. That's 4 years, but actually, like making a movie did not take as long.
There's so
back
many.
then. The editing was
many.
like we call it like the cutting room floor, because like you would just cut the scenes you wanted out and then stitch it back together. That was what editing consisted of. Like it wasn't in any. So you would be a movie. You might spend 6 weeks making a movie, but you'd be under contract with a studio. So you'd then you'd more or less make 10 or 12 movies every year if you were a big like studio star. So people like Clara Bow from the last movie. She made like fucking dozens of movies, and she was only active for
to
6,
support
7
your
years.
point. Anita Page made in 1929 the same year as this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 movies. The year after she made 7 movies. The year after she made 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 movies. Like you think about that, like how many movies is George Clooney making per year?
Well,
2,
the general
maybe?
rule of thumb now is a big starring actor is not going to make more than 1 or maybe at a push 2 movies in a year.
A big Hollywood
Jim
movie.
Carrey, at the height of his powers, was making 3 movies a year, and that was like, oh my god, 3 movies in a year. But it was different in the 20s because.
Yeah. So this goes to the point of Anita Page being in this movie and then dropping off the face of the earth until the mid-90s, coming back. It's a fascinating Wikipedia page, well worth checking out. But we also talked about Hank, played by Bessie Love, who's a woman, despite the male name. And I think what we classify this as is coding, because she is coded as she's got loads of gumption. She is mouthy. And I'm just saying this is what the movie's saying. I'm not necessarily agreeing with those terms.
Sam hates women.
Yeah. She's also really, she's kind of like dressed to not be as pretty, and she's older than Anita Page's
she's
character.
coded to be a little older, a bit more dowdy, a bit of a harridan, and I think sometimes like a coded as being not poor exactly, but coded as being a bit gauche, a bit lower class.
Yes,
like she's trying to start a fight with one of the dancers when they've got their audition, because she says something mean to her, and she's like, I can't remember the exact word, but she's basically like, "I will fuck you up, bitch," or the 1929 version of that, which I think is like, "I'll give you what for" or something, but she keeps saying it. It's hilarious, but it's like that, and people are this in real life, and it's the same like today. It's the sign generally. It's kind of like when a film is coding someone for being poor. That's when they'll have a temper and they'll just start getting screaming matches with people, and that's all kind of baked into this character.
Now I'm going to defend the movie slightly here, because we are working our way through in the late 20s, early 30s of like kind of first wave feminism is happening. History lesson, guys. Strap on. In. That's an American dad joke.
Wires there, Sam.
That's an American dad joke that we just say all the time. It's nothing to do with
Sam hates women.
the content of what I was talking about. Just
it's fine, Sam. No one's ever going to listen to this. We're okay. Your grandchildren, your children, when you're dead, they'll be like, "Oh, I'll listen to Dad's old podcasts."
And they'll be like,
God,
wow.
Dad was really into dildos, wasn't he? Yeah, that's
7,000.
He keeps saying it.
7,000 episodes, and they're like, a movie from like 200 years ago? Nah, we're good. We're okay. So my point, though, is that like it's a kind of encouraging to see a character who's not just a precious petal, as Anita Page's character is, Queenie, because she's got gumption. She's fighting. And I think this is trying to represent what we're seeing in the late 20s, early 30s, which is the flapper who's gregarious and is drinking and doing all of the, like actually slightly emancipated from being a woman.
Them to have their cake and eat it too, to a certain extent, because you have Queenie having the more heteronormative sort of finding a man, the love story,
pretty girl season.
While at the same time you have the Hank, her, basically the culmination of her arc in this movie is she loves being on stage and she's going to go and continue to do that, and there isn't a man involved. She's
eventually in Illinois.
Might be a woman involved, but there's no man involved, and it's more of like I'm just going to strike out on my own and do what I enjoy because that's what drives me.
And there's a scene in this where they start smoking, and that really struck it to me as being
smoke.
Please watch our listeners' ears, because there's a great some really interesting stuff about how
really top advertising campaign, really great advertising campaign, really successful.
In the 1920s, like smoking was a male thing. It was a male thing, and there's cartoons of women smoking and it being a kind of, what the fuck is she doing? Like that's disgusting. Men should die of cancer, not women. That was the message. And then who comes along? History lesson. Here we go. Edward Bernays. Now this is a fascinating, despicable person who basically invented PR. He took some of the ideas from Freud, who I think he was his uncle or something. There was some family connection, and basically invented advertising and invented manipulating people on a grand scale. And so he had, in 1929, the same year that this movie came out, women smoking, marching down the Thanksgiving Day parade with torches of freedom, is what he called the cigarettes. And so smoking became this emancipation. You could, as a woman, smoke because it was about striking out on your own and taking on, like feminine roles. And
you can imagine
imagine
the boardroom meeting, can't you? Like, say, how can we sell more cigarettes? And someone goes, well, the latest census says that up to 50% of people are women. And they're like, women don't smoke. What if they did smoke?
But what if they could? So exactly.
And it's a recurring thing, actually. This torches of freedom thing is not just in the 20s in America. Some of the statistics that women smoking went from something like 4 or 5% to like 40%. Like it's a huge rise. And then actually very similar campaigns were used in Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall, that the tobacco companies were like suddenly, do you know what I mean? They can go into these countries which now have like some of the highest smoking rates in Europe.
Fucking ridiculous.
Because of these, like the companies rushed in, like McDonald's basically. The McDonald's of smoking rushed in and said, smoke. It's cool. It makes you look cool.
And it comes back. To 1929. It comes back to Edward Bernays. There's a great Adam Curtis documentary which you can find on YouTube called The Century of Self, and the first episode is all about Edward Bernays. And Dave, you're going to watch it this evening. and enjoy it. It's honestly, it's fucking fascinating. It's fascinating where I learned about this, and then I'm gonna get a book about it as well. It's really good.
It's really interesting, and it's noteworthy in this film that the characters, I don't think, are smoking. I think doesn't a Hank take a cigarette from someone else?
They do smoke later on, and they're very much into it, which I think it must be tied in. It must be
into it.
Edward Bernays is sitting in the background. Yes, good, more, more. Right, so moving on. Let's talk about
the plot of this movie, shall we?
Yeah, let's talk about Charles King a second, who plays Eddie, who's kind of like the male.
The blandest, beigest character or actor who ever appeared in any movie.
Yeah, so we'll move on, but he's important. He's there because he's going to eventually... Him and Anita and Hank have a kind of thing going on, don't they? And then, whoop, end of the movie. Actually, Queenie.
So it's established that the sisters have come to the big city. They're going to be stars, baby. We have the stuttering uncle, who I do want to let's have a small... actually, I think on the grand scheme of things, this could have been more offensive. But it's obviously like what's funny? People with disabilities, go. And
Jed Prouty plays Uncle Jed. Yeah. Oh, it's the same name as the actor. That's weird. He has a lot of movies from 1919 to 1950. He's in movies. Good for him.
But yeah, that's a bit of a punching down joke. But again, it's 1929 in the grand scheme of things. I think we can not let it go. We've mentioned it, but let's not, whip that horse to death.
We've got other things to worry about, yeah.
There are more offensive things in more movies than this. But anyway, so then they have basically Hank's boyfriend, Eddie. I think that's not fiance. I think it's very important that they don't. He's not a fiance because again, there is a bit of women's lib running through this. Say a smidge in this movie made by men, starring men for men, and it is for men. Look at men. Look at all these women in skimpy outfits. But the two sisters, Eddie is a singer / he writes songs. He's in the play, so he's got them an audition. He's their way in. And then the whole plot sort of tumbles from there as Hank has frustrations because she keeps getting cut out of the show. Queenie's like the apple of everyone's eye. She's literally put in a bikini and tied to the prow of a ship.
Not figuratively objectified, literally objectified. She's the what's the front of a ship called? The bow.
Figurehead.
I don't know.
The prow.
The prow, right? Thank you.
I said prow.
The figurehead. She could be a piece of wood.
She could be a sexy piece of wood. But
all.
That's anyway. So then, basically, it becomes apparent that the two sisters are only really still employed because Queenie's hot. Basically, is what the film is saying.
She's going out with Jack Warner, and. So that's keeping them. So
that's what that boils down to. And in the midst of this, you've kind of got this like Eddie realizing he has feelings for Queenie. Doesn't go the way that it would go in a movie made today. And Queenie having feelings for him, but being conflicted because he's going out with Hank. While at the same time being flattered by the attentions of Wernier or whatever his name is.
Jack Warner. Just call him Jack Warner. It's fine.
Jack Warner, flattered by his attentions, but also a bit naive and a bit like, I think Hank says, he'll never marry you. He just wants to fuck you, basically, is their big argument. So the whole movie is kind of like that. And not a lot really happens, like in terms of actual plot movements, until we have the big bust up at the end. But that's generally the idea, is that we get these characters kind of like having their little small plot going on, and then loads and loads of women in not skimpy outfits for now. It looked quite, I thought, this is respectful and stayed, but for 1929, I bet this was hot.
You know what? I really noticed it when, quite at the start of the movie, when they're like stripping to get into a bath. And they're not like, there's not even the bra, we're not even seeing bras, it is like, fucking jeez, for 1929, this is pre-code as well. This is pre-Hays Code as well.
We've got another 3 or 4 of these, I think, before the code kicks in.
And the censors who back to my Howard Hughes book, there's, I can't remember the fucking name of the actor, but basically there's a movie that he made, The Outlaw. Oh Christ, I'm trying to find it, but basically he made where making the breasts as big as possible was the fucking primary like driver for the entire movie, and so like you end up with this just Jane Russell, and there's this standoff because by that point the Hays Code and all of the censors were moralizing over movies because of films like this. Now, as you say, it isn't particularly for now. You know, people aren't fucking on screen, which is what we're used to. But they're having a bat, like they're stripping off, and I just think like this is racy. This is racy as shit.
It's kind of like in the way that the last movie we did, Wings, also had a couple of scenes that were like, "Hey, say, that's a woman's shoulder." Like a few scenes or implied nudity. In a way that you wouldn't really expect because you're used to watching like 40s and 50s movies, which were really quite heavily censored, like we said. So it kind of is a bit freer in that way.
Yeah,
that culminates. Like I said, not that it's particularly debauched or anything.
No, but it's suggestive, isn't it? It's sexy, and that's the point. The Hughes story is interesting because Jane Russell was not very impressed by being treated like a complete object, to the point where I think, and it's in The Aviator, where he's designing some kind of contraption to make Jane Russell's breasts appear more fulsome. So she wasn't happy with that, but then they were having a on and off thing, and I think skip forward to when was it, 1950 something, the French line, where literally, and this is the time of 3D glasses. Yes, listener, 3D was a thing, and it was shit then, and it was shit again in 2008 when they tried to do it.
Oh, they'll bring it back again, and it'll be shit then as well.
They just can't get over 3D. But literally on the posters, Jane Russell, very voluptuous outfit, and look at JR in 3D. It'll knock both of your eyes out. Literally what it said. And I just think, like, fucking hell. They were going for this, and they were going for this back in 1929, and this is an Oscar winner when they were trying to, because fucking men just want to, I don't know, there's no internet, I guess. So how else are you going to see this shit?
Well, that's true. It's interesting that this is an Oscar winner. It's certainly the weakest one we've done so far.
One of two.
No, I really do think this is going to stand out as a bit of an aberration as an Oscar winner, because it's not. I think for all the reasons that it was successful and popular at the time, I don't think we really need to talk through the plot much more. We'll have some things to touch on, but for all the reasons that it was successful at the time, are the same reasons why it's pretty moderate now. It's pretty like, it's not overly like sexualized to a modern viewer. It's not overly dramatic. The singing isn't very good by design or otherwise. The songs aren't particularly memorable or noteworthy. It's technically quite impressive, and obviously from going from silent movies to a talkie, I think that's the main thing and why this was so impressive. But you kind of lose that in the 90 or so years that have elapsed since it was made.
Yeah, it's hard to, and I have been looking at the for contemporary, and I maybe need to be have some kind of access to an archive. But why did this win? And it's hard to pin that down, and that's something I think that's going to get easier as we go along, because we'll have more access to print media, and we're going to see the reasons why films win. But it's hard to pin this down. The only thing I can think of is that it was the first talkie the first full talkie from MGM at least. And I think maybe some of the songs, which we haven't really talked about because we're not interested in musicals, but some of the songs are okay. But there is something that's really engaging. Again, I just go back to that thing at the start of I'm connecting with these characters from almost 100 years ago, and I'm enjoying experiencing their lives. And like, I think there's something relatively engaging about that in a way that
Well,
you.
Contemporary
on.
review from Variety said it has everything a silent picture should have outside of its dialogue: a basic story with some sense to it, action, excellent direction, laughs, obviously the disabled jokes, a tear, a couple of great performances, and plenty of sex. Like,
Is that what it says?
and that's what it says, and that's from and it was people went out to see this because it was new and it was different, and like we said, you're making as a studio. I mean, because there's no television really at the time, and like people,
What else are you gonna do?
exactly. So you're just going to churn out these movies, and this would have been like a wow, that's a bit risque, and wow, and most people wouldn't have been familiar with Broadway, so it's maybe like a look into that, and these inner Hollywood movies. Like, war movies are great, obviously, but these inner Hollywood movies where you're watching real people, like, no one's a superhero, no one's at war, no one's doing like heroic things. These are just people being people, and there's an appeal there. On top of, like, some of the reviews are like, women can talk? Question mark. Because it is such a revolutionary thing that we're moving from silent movies, and that's maybe why the fan, because this movie made loads of money, and part of that, obviously, in the greater theme of this podcast, that the making loads of money is always going to be a big part of why films have historically won Best Picture.
Mm-hmm.
Being the biggest movie around does not hurt your chances. But I think it's one of those movies that, looking back even 10 years later, you were thinking, well, I can think of better movies from that year that have, like, and usually it's movies that are more intensely written or a bit more...
Yeah. Well, we said this about...
unique, or with something to say, because this movie doesn't really have a lot to say.
Yeah. We said this about the first movie that we did, Wings, the first Oscar winner, Best Picture winner, because same year Metropolis came out, didn't it? And I think Wings is a popcorn flick, and Metropolis is like, fucking, are we overthrowing the oligarchy yet, or what? Like, it's a real fucking intense movie. Like, Metropolis is like, so everyone is underground, and like the working classes are completely suppressed, and we can do anything about that, or like, and I just think
Metropolis is, they made a harder Star Trek in 1928. Like, or 1927, sorry. They made a really fucking hardcore Star Trek.
It's a 12.8 on the Roddenberry scale. Like, imagine.
Yeah.
Imagine.
Everyone is in tinfoil outfits. Everyone's got bare chests and thighs, and it's a wild movie. But like you said, those are the sorts of things we'll remember as transformative and as what's the word? Like, having this legacy of being referenced and having a good an impact going into the future. Where I think this movie is a product of the tropes that existed at the time, which still existed afterwards. But I don't think a lot of movies are directly drawing from this movie, if you know what I mean.
No.
They're drawing from the same things this movie is drawing from.
And I want to keep that thought in your mind just for a second. But before I move on to that thing of movies that have had a bigger cultural impact than this film, a couple of things I want to touch on. We get title cards in this film. And that, to me, is really interesting, because it's like we get a moment where we have a scene happens, dialogue, and then we go to the next scene.
Batman's lair.
We are literally presented with a swanky hotel room, or whatever I can't remember the exact text, but literally, like a silent movie, it shows us on screen what's happening and where they are, and then we see the scene. And it was like, I've never seen that before. I have never seen a silent movie title card in a talkie. And I just think that is a wonderful little snapshot of history, because we see that we're in a transition phase, and that we're in a moment where we're not really sure what's happening and the format's developing.
Exactly.
It's
amazing
not quite
to see booking the trends that exist. It's a bit like Ghostbusters not having opening credits. Like, it's not quite the same, but it's like it's a shift. It's a shift in the way that cinema's done. Like, a lot of films these days, It's a cold open, and you just kind of jump in and you go. But then you do get movies with title cards. Some of the most recent Star Wars movies had title cards to tell you where you were. And this is still a thing that's used, but it's not the norm in the way that a silent movie title card is, like in this, where it's not saying, oh, the Luxor Hotel. It's like a hotel.
Yeah.
Because we weren't paying for a set that would immediately make it obvious it was a hotel.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? It's like now we have establishing shots, and this was obviously something that was developed as part of the grammar of movies. And that's the thing that I think, again, is like, we see some of that in this. I think we see, it feels relatively well positioned in terms of like, you're not having to relearn how to watch movies. And that's the thing that I think with silent movies, you kind of need to learn how to watch them because they're presenting things in a totally different way. Whereas this in 1929 it's pretty accessible, and it's about the characters and what they're saying, and we don't get many shots where the camera moves, but there are a few scenes where we get quite quick cuts. There's a bit where Eddie's talking to the conductor in the pit, the orchestra pit, and the editing is quite sharp. It's doing that classic editing thing of staying ahead of the audience in terms of just as you're finished listening to what Eddie says, just slightly before they move on to what the conductor says, and so it snaps back and forward quite well. So we're not having to do that much work, I don't think, for a movie from, again, almost 100 years ago. And I think that's something that's quite impressive. Like, this didn't feel like a real hard watch in a way that I was totally expecting it to be.
We weren't looking forward to this, and it was a lot better than I expected. But again, I think I can't quite escape the fact that whereas Wings, I could really say, like, even outside of us, I think a lot of people could watch that and really get something from it, because especially when you say to them, like, they're really flying that fucking plane. There's a camera strapped to the front of it. Like, he's got to act and fly a plane.
What?
Like, I think you could watch that, and you know what I mean? That comes through in the filmmaking because it's so insane. But like this, what is there for a modern audience? Like, there's us, but we're like arch film nerds, and the 3 or 4 PhD students who are listening.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service. Good luck getting a job with that degree.
And we've got history degrees. We know
about being unemployable. But like, what is there for like a modern audience? I sometimes sit and watch these movies with my mum, because I'm a well-adjusted adult in my 30s who lives with his mother because the economy is collapsing around us as we
It's
speak.
okay. Keep moving. It's fine.
That's fine. And she was like, "Oh, what is it?" And I was like, "Oh, I've got to watch it on my laptop because it's I don't want to have to pay to stream it because I'm sure it's going to be terrible." I was like, a 1929 musical, and she sort of did this face like, they had musicals in 1929. Like, they had film in 1929. History stretches back to 1929.
I literally said it in the sequence to Nicola. I was like, "I'm watching a musical," and it was like, "Oh yeah, it's about 2 sisters who were like trying to break into Broadway." "Oh yeah, it's from 1929."
Oh no!
And that is the noise that you heard, isn't it? Absolutely. Okay, so I'm out. I'm watching this. It's fine. Enjoy. I think enjoy your weird movie is what she said.
Fair, totally fair. And again, like, All Quiet on the Western Front, which we're going to do next month, would be a much easier sell because number one, you fucking heard of it.
Yeah.
Like, whereas this is sort of sits in that it's forgotten, not because it's necessarily really repugnant or bad. It's just bang average.
Well, you gave it a 5 out of 10, didn't you, in your
and I think that's fair. I was interested enough, and I was engaged enough, but I wasn't like,
yeah, it's an average movie.
I didn't really care.
It's a totally bang average movie, but I say it all the time, and I feel like a fucking broken record. But Citizen Kane, Citizen Kane. You can just bypass that movie. You don't understand why it was good because it's about what's, the contemporary movies weren't as impressive as this is, and so there is something to say about that. You mentioned All Quiet on the Western Front. I've watched this film many years ago. I've also watched the
I was gonna say,
the
what's the
19
remake?
no, I watched the 1980s TV movie, which is fucking no. Honest, shut up! Don't fucking laugh at me. It's a
I was just
great
going to say,
film.
are you certain that the TV movie from the 1980s is the best version of this?
It's honestly really, really good. It's really, really good, and I think you would enjoy it. I have not, however, watched the recent Netflix one because I'm not sure I have the emotional capacity to deal with just how traumatic that is. Because even this movie from the 1930s, whenever it is fucking intense. This is an intense movie. This is a movie that I think is going to stand out for us as being like, oh, okay, now we're making fucking movies. Like this is going to be different, and so I look forward to watching.
I really did think they'd remade All Quiet on the Western Front more than twice, I should say. There's a 1979 film, there's a 2022 film, and there's the 1930 original, and that's it.
There is three of them, and I think that says something because it is. I mean, obviously the novel is really, the anti-war message just runs through because fucking wars keep happening. Jesus, but there's something special about this story, and there's something special about this movie, and I really look forward to watching that in a month or so. It's going to be really good, but I'm really glad that we didn't just abandon this format. I'm really glad that we actually said, you know what, let's push through and watch an hour and a half.
We always said, Sam, when we first conceived this, like literally 3 years ago, and then didn't do anything about it because life. We literally said we're going to have to get through those first two movies. And I think I've been pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed Wings, partly because we were somewhat drunk when we were watching that. And I'm really surprised by how much I didn't hate this. I know that's a real neg for this 95-year-old movie.
Yeah, well done.
But like that's just where I stand because like I wouldn't even say I particularly liked it, but I didn't dislike it, and sometimes that's something.
So you can take that for granted. I think it's, I keep repeating myself, and I don't like doing that. But we watched a movie from nearly 100 years ago, and it was engaging, and I cared about the characters, and I'm interested in their lives, and I want to see.
I don't think that should be like as shocking as that because we're
but
still.
Just think conceptually about that because
we're still recycling the same Shakespeare plays, and they're fucking 300 years old now. And
I know, but I just think it's amazing. I think I'm so glad to get really bromancy on you right now, Dave. I'm so glad that we get to do this, that we get to go through and experience these movies in a way that
because no one can stop us. That's right, not even you, PhD students who are listening to this.
Fuck you. we will.
No, shut up. That's it. Episode over. Fuck you.
Fuck you. We've got 90. What is it? 94 years left of the Oscars to get through, and plus
I think it'll work out. Actually, will we not have had close to 100 Oscars by the time we actually finish doing this series?
I think it's something about 7 years, isn't it? If we do one a month, which I think we're roughly.
If we do another 7 years, by the time we've then done the 7 months on top of that, there'll have been 102 Best Pictures. So
wow.
Are we just over 1%?
So we just need to stay number one, stay alive. Number two, stay friends. Number three, continue the podcast. That to me feels like the surest one because I don't care how much I fucking hate you. I have now developed some kind of dependency on talking about movies every week. So I think that's going to be a lifelong bond. No matter what happens,
Absolutely.
we're never ever
thousands
stopping.
of episodes of us talking
Ever stopping. Right, I'm gonna in grand Hollywood tradition. You keep talking for a second, Dave. That's what I'm going to ask you to do right now. While I try and find the link. I was trying to be smooth, but it's not worked out. Here we go.
I mean, it never really works out when you ask.
Sorry, Dave.
You're being. Come in and say something.
Sorry, you're being sounded out now. because it's the Oscars, and that's what happens at the Oscars, isn't it? Is they just gradually increase the volume
We have to go. We have to
of
go
the
back
music
to our
until you can't hear
Oscar
anymore.
voter,
Thanks, sir.
white
Sorry,
man
Dave.
cave.
Thanks, cheers. Thank you. Please conclude your speech now. Thanks very much. Nobody cares. Stop fucking thanking your agent. I, however, can keep talking.